La guerrera apache, cero los ojos para morir, y despertó, en la cama de un ranchero. Among them was Ahioka, a young warrior whose courage and skill in battle were spoken of in whispers among both her people and those who had encountered her. She moved through the camp with quiet confidence, her eyes sharp and alert, noticing even the smallest changes in the environment. Her heart beat steadily, but beneath it lay the weight of worry. Rumors of soldiers approaching had reached the camp, and the elders spoke in low tones about the dangers ahead. Ahioka had faced danger before, but today felt different. She had trained her entire life for moments like this, yet a strange tension lingered in her chest. Her hands rested on the bow she carried, the wood worn smooth from years of practice. Every arrow she had ever loosed seemed to hum in her memory, reminding her that life and death often balanced on the edge of a single choice. As the sun climbed higher, the sound of hoofbeats reached the ears of the Apache. Scouts had returned, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. The soldiers were near, moving faster than anyone had anticipated. Ahioka's heart pounded, but she held her ground. She looked at her fellow warriors, seeing the mixture of fear and determination mirrored in their eyes. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it." The tribe prepared quickly, moving with practiced precision. Horses were readied, weapons sharpened, and families were guided to safe places within the hills. Ahioka took her place among the warriors, her mind focused yet her senses stretched to the limit. She could feel the tension in the air, a vibration that ran through the ground and into her bones. She knew that this battle would test every skill she had ever learned. The first clash came without warning. Smoke rose from the horizon as the soldiers entered the clearing, their armor glinting in the sunlight. Ahioka's heart raced, but she steadied her breath. She nocked an arrow, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline surging through her body. With a practiced motion, she let it fly, and the arrow found its mark. Around her, the sounds of battle grew louder, the cries of warriors mingling with the clash of metal and the thundering of hooves. Ahioka moved with a fluid grace, dodging and striking with precision. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. Yet, even as she fought, her mind remained aware of the larger picture. She could see the patterns in the enemy's formation, the small openings that could be exploited, and the dangers that could not be ignored. Her training had taught her to act quickly, to think ahead, and to protect not just herself but those around her. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The battle raged on, leaving trails of smoke and dust in its wake. Ahioka's body ached, her muscles burning from exertion, but she refused to falter. She had faced pain before and had always pushed beyond it, knowing that survival depended on focus and resilience. Her mind flashed with images of her village, her family, and the elders who had entrusted her with their safety. She could not fail them. But then, a sharp pain tore through her side. She stumbled, her vision blurring as she felt the impact of a soldier's strike. The world tilted, and for a moment, everything seemed to hang in a suspended silence. Ahioka fell to the ground, her hands pressing against the wound as blood seeped through her fingers. She could hear the shouts of her companions, the clash of weapons, and the distant cries of the wounded. Her strength wavered, and a deep weariness settled over her. As she lay there, the sky above spinning in a haze of sunlight and smoke, Ahioka's thoughts turned inward. She remembered the lessons of her ancestors, the stories of warriors who had faced impossible odds. She thought of her mother, her father, and the friends she had grown up with. A tear slid down her cheek, mixing with the dust and sweat of battle. She had fought with all her might, yet now she felt the cold grip of mortality. Closing her eyes, Ahioka whispered a silent farewell to the world she loved. She imagined the faces of her people, the rivers and hills she had roamed, and the warm firelight of her home. She felt a strange peace settling over her, a calm acceptance that the end had come. Her breathing slowed and her body grew heavy. The sounds of the battlefield faded, replaced by the quiet rhythm of her own heartbeat. In that moment, Ahioka thought she was ready to leave. She had lived as a warrior, as a protector, and as a daughter of her people. She had faced fear and danger with courage, and now she felt the stillness of surrender. She let go of the tension in her body, allowing herself to drift toward the unknown. The last thing she remembered was the warmth of the sun on her face and the distant murmur of the wind through the trees. But fate had other plans. The world she knew, the battle she had fought so valiantly, began to blur and shift. Darkness pressed around her like a thick blanket, yet beneath it she sensed a strange presence, a force guiding her away from the edge of death. Her mind, though fading, caught glimpses of movement and light, of hands reaching toward her and voices calling her name. Though her body was broken and weary, a spark of life remained within Ahioka. It was a stubborn, quiet flame, the essence of her spirit that refused to be extinguished. Somewhere beyond the pain and fear, that spark pulsed with determination, refusing to let her go. And as the battlefield and its chaos dissolved into shadow, she felt herself being lifted, carried by unseen hands to a place of warmth and safety. Time lost meaning as she drifted, suspended between life and death. The memories of her village, the teachings of her elders, and the laughter of friends mingled with the unfamiliar sensations surrounding her. She sensed the care of someone who did not wish her harm, though she could not see them. Every breath was shallow, but it was enough to keep the tiny flame of life alive. In the silence, Ahioka found clarity. She realized that courage was not only about facing enemies or surviving battles. It was also about embracing the unknown, trusting in forces beyond her understanding, and allowing herself to be vulnerable when necessary. Her body was broken, but her spirit remained unyielding. She was still a warrior, even in the quiet moments of surrender. And then, as if waking from a deep dream, Ahioka felt the first stirrings of life returning. She sensed a soft surface beneath her, the warmth of a body nearby, and the steady rhythm of another heartbeat. Slowly, hesitantly, she opened her eyes, only to find herself in a place entirely unexpected. The sun's rays no longer fell across a battlefield, but through the small window of a wooden cabin. The scent of hay and wood smoke filled the air, mingling with the lingering traces of healing herbs. Confusion gripped her as she tried to sit up, but her body protested. She was weak, her muscles trembling, and every movement sent waves of pain through her. Yet beneath the fear and uncertainty, a flicker of hope began to emerge. She was alive. Against all odds, she had survived. And though she did not yet know it, the path before her would be unlike anything she had ever imagined. A journey that would challenge her not only as a warrior, but as a human being. For now she lay in the quiet cabin, listening to the distant sounds of life outside, and felt a strange, almost impossible sense of safety. The battle was over, but the story of Ahioka, the young Apache warrior who had faced death and returned, was only just beginning. Ahioka's eyes blinked open slowly, the light of the morning sun streaming through a small window. At first, the world felt strange and unfamiliar, and she lay still, trying to make sense of her surroundings. The smell of warm wood, fresh hay, and something faintly herbal reached her nose. Her body ached everywhere, and the wound on her side throbbed with every heartbeat. She wanted to rise, to check the horizon for signs of danger, but even the slightest movement caused a sharp stab of pain. Panic rose in her chest, but she forced herself to take slow, deliberate breaths. She remembered the battlefield, the screams, the chaos, the sharp pain that had brought her to this state, and fear gripped her for a moment. She was not in the open plains anymore, and there were no familiar sounds of her people around her. Yet despite the uncertainty, she was alive, and that fact alone gave her a small measure of relief. As she struggled to sit up, she noticed a man quietly tending to a small fire in the corner of the cabin. He looked ordinary at first glance, a a simple rancher with worn clothes and gentle hands, but there was a quiet strength in the way he moved, a calmness that contrasted sharply with the violence she had just survived. His eyes widened slightly as he noticed her stirring, but his expression was warm, not fearful. "Easy now," he said softly, his voice steady and calm. "You've been through a lot. Don't move too quickly." Ahioka's first instinct was to draw her weapon, to stand and defend herself immediately. But the pain in her side reminded her that she was weak, and the gentleness in the man's tone made her hesitate. She scanned the small cabin, taking in its simple furnishings: a wooden table, a few chairs, a small bed she now realized she lay upon, and a few shelves lined with jars of herbs and grains. Everything was modest, functional, and strangely comforting. "Who are you?" she asked cautiously, her voice hoarse. "My name is Emilio," the man replied, taking a step closer but keeping his distance. "I found you near the edge of the forest, badly hurt. I brought you here and did what I could to help you. You're safe now." Ahioka's mind raced. She had been so close to death, yet here she was, alive in the care of a stranger. Her pride warred with her gratitude. She was a warrior, trained to be independent, to survive on her own, to trust only those who had proven themselves in the heat of battle. And yet something about Emilio's calm presence and the way he had rescued her made it difficult to feel suspicion. I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Emilio nodded as if he had expected her hesitation. "I don't expect you to. But you're too weak to stand or fight. You need to rest." He paused, then gently added, "I won't hurt you. I only want to help." Ahioka studied him carefully. His words seemed honest and she could sense no malice in him, but her instincts told her to remain cautious. She wanted to know more, to understand who this man was and why he had chosen to help her. Yet, despite the uncertainty, her body demanded rest. Slowly, she allowed herself to lean back against the pillows, her muscles trembling as she tried to relax. As the hours passed, Ahioka watched Emilio work quietly. He cleaned and prepared simple meals, tended the small fire, and moved with a natural ease around the cabin. He spoke little, but when he did, it was with patience and care. He seemed to understand the needs of someone who had been through trauma without pressing or demanding anything. Ahioka's mind wandered, replaying the events that had brought her here. She remembered the battlefield, the flash of steel, the cries of warriors and soldiers, and the sudden pain that had nearly claimed her life. The memory was vivid, yet distant, like a dream she had barely survived. She wondered why fate had not allowed her to die that day, why she had been spared to awaken in this quiet cabin far from her home. Days passed slowly, each one a mixture of recovery, observation, and cautious interaction. Ahioka learned to trust the rhythms of the cabin, the predictability of daily life under Emilio's care. He showed her how to drink the herbal teas that eased her pain, how to move gently without straining her wounds, and how to care for herself in ways that reminded her of the teachings of her own elders. Despite her growing reliance on him, Ahioka maintained a strong sense of independence. She refused to let herself be treated as weak or incapable, and she practiced small movements and exercises to regain her strength. Emilio respected her determination, offering guidance but never pressing her beyond what she could handle. Slowly, a quiet bond formed between them, built on mutual respect rather than familiarity. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the cabin floor, Ahioka stepped outside for the first time since her rescue. The air was fresh and clean, filled with the scent of grass and distant pine. She inhaled deeply, feeling the life within her body once again. The world beyond the cabin was different from her home in the plains, yet it was alive and full of possibility. She moved cautiously, testing her strength, and discovered that her legs could support her, her arms could bear weight, and her spirit, though bruised, remained unbroken. Emilio watched her silently, offering a quiet nod of encouragement. He did not intrude, nor did he demand anything from her. For Ahioka, this calm patience was almost as healing as the herbs and care that had saved her life. She realized that survival was not only about strength and skill, but also about trust, patience, and the willingness to accept help when necessary. As the days continued, Ahioka began to share small pieces of her story with Emilio. She spoke of her family, her village, and the traditions she had grown up with. Though her words were careful and measured, she found comfort in recounting her past, in putting her memories into speech. Emilio listened without judgment, never pressing for more than she was willing to reveal. His quiet acceptance gave her a sense of safety she had not felt since leaving her home. But even in this peaceful environment, Ahioka's mind remained alert. She knew that danger could appear at any moment, and she could not fully let her guard down. Each night, she slept lightly, listening for unusual sounds and feeling for threats in the shadows. Yet she also discovered moments of unexpected peace, the gentle warmth of the sun, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the simple rhythm of daily life in the cabin. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Ahioka sat by the fire with Emilio. They shared a simple meal, and she felt a flicker of something she had not experienced in a long time: companionship. It was not friendship in the way she had known with her fellow warriors, nor was it family in the traditional sense. It was something quieter, a mutual understanding and respect forged through shared experience and the simple act of survival. Ahioka realized that her journey was far from over. She had survived the battle, been rescued, and found herself in a place of safety. Yet the world outside the cabin remained uncertain, full of challenges she could not yet see. And still, she felt a growing sense of hope, a recognition that life could continue, that she could adapt, and that she could forge connections even in the most unexpected of places. As she lay in the cabin that night, her body still sore but her spirit stronger, Ahioka reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. She had closed her eyes, expecting death, and yet she had awakened to a second chance. The path ahead was unknown, filled with both opportunity and risk. But she was a warrior, and warriors adapt, endure, and survive. And so, with the faint glow of the fire casting shadows on the wooden walls, Ahioka allowed herself a small moment of peace. She had been given life again, and with it came the possibility of new beginnings. Though the journey ahead was uncertain, she felt ready to face it, step by step, learning, observing, and growing in ways she could not yet imagine. The world outside the cabin awaited, full of mystery and promise, and Ahioka was determined to meet it with the same courage that had always defined her. Days turned into weeks, and Ahioka began to feel the strength returning to her body. Every morning she rose with the sun, moving carefully but steadily through the small cabin and the surrounding land. Her muscles, once stiff and sore, started to regain their power, and the wound on her side slowly healed under Emilio's attentive care. Yet it wasn't just her body that was recovering. Her mind, too, was adjusting to the unfamiliar rhythm of life in the rancher's world. Ahioka watched Emilio as he went about his daily tasks. He had a simple routine, yet there was a grace in the way he worked. He fed the animals, mended fences, and tended the small fields, all while moving with a quiet confidence that seemed to make the world feel steadier. Ahioka admired his diligence, but more than that, she observed his patience, the way he allowed her to explore and learn without rushing or pressuring her. Curiosity stirred in her. The cabin was nothing like the wide, open plains of her village, where she had grown up hunting, running, and learning from her elders. Here, the landscape was smaller, enclosed by fences and fields, yet it held its own lessons. She began to notice the subtle changes in the weather, the way animals responded to her presence, and the careful ways Emilio interacted with the land. She realized that survival did not always require combat or skill with weapons. Sometimes it was about observation, understanding, and careful action. Ahioka started participating in the daily tasks of ranch life. She helped feed the animals, learning their habits and the trust they required. She carried water from the well, swept the floor, and even tried her hand at simple cooking, though she found the process slow and unfamiliar. At first, Emilio guided her gently, showing her the easiest ways to manage tasks, but he quickly allowed her to experiment and learn on her own. Ahioka felt a strange satisfaction in mastering these simple chores. They were different from her training as a warrior, yet they demanded the same focus, patience, and awareness. At night, Ahioka often sat by the window, watching the stars stretch across the sky. She remembered the wide night sky of her homeland, filled with constellations that told the stories of her people. Here, the stars were different, yet just as beautiful. She thought of her family and her village, imagining the elders sitting by the fire, telling stories she would never hear again. Nostalgia mingled with a sense of loss, but also with a quiet determination. She knew that, although she had left her past behind, the teachings of her people were still a part of her. Emilio noticed the thoughtful looks on her face and sometimes asked questions. He never pressed for details, respecting her boundaries, but he expressed genuine interest in her stories and her perspective. Over time, Ahioka began to feel a sense of trust growing between them. She could speak about her life in small fragments, sharing lessons learned in hunting, tracking, and survival without feeling vulnerable. Emilio listened carefully, sometimes offering insights from his own life as a rancher, and the exchange became a subtle bond that neither of them rushed to define. One morning, Emilio suggested they venture beyond the cabin for a short walk. Ahioka agreed, moving cautiously as they crossed the fields and approached a small stream. The sound of flowing water was soothing, and Ahioka felt a strange sense of peace she had not known in months. She knelt by the stream, dipping her fingers into the cool water, and watched as fish darted beneath the surface. For the first time since awakening in the cabin, she felt a connection to the land that was not tied to survival or combat. Emilio smiled at her quietly. "The land has its own way of teaching," he said. "You just have to listen." Ahioka nodded thoughtfully, realizing he was right. She had learned to read the land in her own way through tracking, hunting, and observation, but here the lessons were different. They were subtler, focused on patience, care, and understanding the rhythms of nature. She began to appreciate the gentle, quiet work that sustained life, recognizing that strength came in many forms. As the days passed, Ahioka's confidence in her body grew. She moved more freely, climbed small hills, and even practiced archery again, though now in a controlled and safe environment. She noticed improvements in her balance, her aim, and her endurance. These exercises were no longer for battle. They were for her own sense of strength, for reclaiming the power that had been weakened by injury. Emilio observed from a distance, offering advice when asked, but never imposing. His respect for her autonomy reinforced the trust that was steadily building between them. Despite the growing comfort, Ahioka never forgot her identity as a warrior. She maintained her sharp awareness of the environment, noting every sound, movement, and detail around her. Even in the peaceful surroundings of the ranch, she remained vigilant, knowing that danger could appear unexpectedly. Yet, she also learned that not every situation required confrontation. Some challenges could be met with patience, observation, and careful planning. Ahioka began to notice small changes within herself. She laughed more easily at Emilio's gentle jokes, found pleasure in small accomplishments, and felt a quiet joy in the simplicity of the work. The cabin, once a strange and confining space, began to feel like a place of refuge, a sanctuary where she could heal both body and mind. Yet she never allowed herself to grow complacent. She trained daily, pushing herself to regain full strength while remaining attuned to the lessons of patience and care that Emilio modeled. One afternoon, As Ahioka worked in the garden, she noticed a small bird trapped in a fence. Its wings flapped desperately and its eyes reflected fear and confusion. Without hesitation, Ahioka moved carefully, speaking in soft tones, and gently freed the bird. It fluttered away, disappearing into the sky, and she felt a profound sense of connection to life. The act reminded her that courage was not always measured in battle. Sometimes it was in the gentle protection of those who could not defend themselves. Emilio watched from the porch, smiling quietly. "You're learning quickly," he said. "The world needs both warriors and caretakers." Ahioka's mind reflected on his words. She realized that her journey was transforming her in ways she had not anticipated. Her strength as a warrior was still essential, but now she was discovering a balance between power and compassion, vigilance and trust. She began to see that survival was not just about defending oneself, but about understanding the environment, nurturing life, and forming bonds with those around her. As the sun set each evening, casting golden light across the fields, Ahioka often walked to the edge of the property and looked out at the horizon. The land stretched endlessly, different from her homeland, yet equally alive. She thought of the warriors she had known, the battles she had fought, and the family she had left behind. A part of her still longed for the plains and the familiarity of her village, but another part recognized that life had given her a new path, one where she could survive, grow, and perhaps find peace. One night, Ahioka and Emilio sat by the fire, sharing a quiet meal. The conversation was light, filled with small observations about the day and the land. Yet beneath the simplicity, there was a deeper understanding forming between them, a recognition of each other's strengths, respect, and resilience. Ahioka realized that trust was no longer a distant concept but a living, breathing reality, built on actions, patience, and shared experiences. Through these days and nights, Ahioka discovered a new sense of identity. She was no longer defined solely by the battlefield or the dangers she had faced. She was learning to be strong in new ways, to adapt, and to embrace life beyond survival. Her skills as a warrior remained, but they were now complemented by empathy, patience, and the quiet wisdom of observing the world around her. And though she still held memories of loss and pain, Ahioka began to understand that life offered second chances, and that healing was as much about mind and spirit as it was about the body. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just to survive, but to live fully, to grow, and to embrace the lessons that the world around her had to offer. By the time the moon rose high above the cabin, Ahioka felt a quiet satisfaction she had not known in months. She had adapted to the rhythms of ranch life, regained strength, and formed a tentative bond with Emilio. Yet she knew that her journey was far from complete. The world beyond the cabin awaited, full of challenges and lessons she could not yet see. But she felt ready to face it, armed with the wisdom of her past and the resilience she had discovered in her new life. Ahioka closed her eyes that night with a sense of quiet determination. She was a warrior still, but now she was also a student of life in its simplest, most profound forms. And as she drifted into sleep, she felt ready for whatever lay ahead, knowing that every day offered the chance to grow, adapt, and embrace the unexpected. Ahioka's days had settled into a gentle rhythm of recovery and learning. Yet even as she embraced the quiet life on the ranch, a part of her remained alert. Years of training as a warrior had taught her that danger could appear at any moment. Every sound, every shadow, every sudden movement demanded attention. She had learned to trust her instincts, and those instincts were growing sharper each day in her new environment. One morning, while gathering water from the small stream beyond the cabin, Ahioka noticed something unusual. The wind carried sounds that didn't belong to the peaceful ranch, hooves not belonging to her animals, voices speaking harshly, and the clatter of metal. She froze, crouching low and observing the approaching figures. Her heart quickened, and her senses sharpened to the familiar rhythm of danger. Through the trees, she could see a small group of men moving toward the cabin. They were strangers, strangers who did not belong to this land. Their posture and expressions suggested trouble, their intent clear to her trained eyes. Ahioka's mind raced, assessing the situation. She realized immediately that the cabin and Emilio were at risk. Her calm days of recovery could not protect them from the world outside. She rushed back to the cabin as quietly as she could, moving swiftly yet cautiously. Emilio noticed her tense expression and immediately understood something was wrong. "What is it?" he asked, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Men, strangers." "They're coming toward us," Ahioka whispered, her voice tight with urgency. Emilio's face darkened with concern. "Are they dangerous?" Ahioka nodded. "Yes, we need to be ready." Without hesitation, she sprang into action. Her body moved with the fluidity of a seasoned warrior, instinct and experience guiding her. She secured the doors and windows, checked the supplies, and prepared to defend the cabin. Emilio watched her, a mixture of awe and admiration in his eyes. Though he had lived his life on this land and faced challenges of his own, he realized that Ahioka's skills were extraordinary. When the strangers reached the cabin, they shouted demands and threats, trying to intimidate the inhabitants. Ahioka moved silently, positioning herself in a place where she could observe and control the situation. She studied their movements, analyzing their numbers and weaknesses. Her mind worked like a map, plotting strategies, anticipating their actions, and calculating the best way to protect Emilio and the cabin. The first attempt to breach the cabin was met with resistance. Ahioka used her knowledge of the land, her agility, and her awareness of every detail to outmaneuver the intruders. She guided Emilio to help secure the animals and maintain safety inside, ensuring that no harm came to him. The strangers underestimated her, assuming that a young woman alone would be an easy target. They were wrong. Ahioka's movements were precise and calculated. She avoided direct confrontation when possible, using clever tactics to keep the strangers at bay. She noticed weaknesses in their formation and exploited them, creating obstacles and distractions that slowed their progress. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained clear, focused on the goal of protecting the cabin and the life it contained. Emilio observed silently, inspired by her courage and skill. Though he was not a trained warrior like Ahioka, he assisted where he could, closing gates, blocking entrances, and following her guidance. Together, they formed an unexpected but effective team, combining his knowledge of the ranch with her combat experience. The strangers grew frustrated as their attempts to gain entry were thwarted again and again. Ahioka's strategy was working. She used the environment to her advantage, leading the intruders into traps she had prepared, using the fences, terrain, and natural obstacles to slow them down. She moved swiftly, silently, and with purpose, her body attuned to every detail around her. Amidst the tension, Ahioka remained aware of her responsibility not only to herself, but to Emilio and the life they were protecting. She thought of her family and village, of the lessons learned in her youth about courage, loyalty, and honor. Those lessons guided her actions, giving her strength and clarity in the midst of chaos. She realized that being a warrior was not only about physical skill, but also about protecting others, making careful decisions, and staying calm under pressure. Hours seemed to stretch into an eternity. The intruders were persistent, but Ahioka's determination was stronger. She anticipated their moves, countered their efforts, and slowly wore down their resolve. Every action she took was measured, ensuring minimal risk while maximizing effectiveness. Emilio assisted quietly, trusting her lead, and together they maintained the integrity of the cabin and the safety of the land. Finally, the intruders, exhausted and frustrated, realized that their efforts were futile. They retreated, leaving the cabin and its inhabitants untouched. Ahioka exhaled deeply, the tension in her body finally easing. She looked around at Emilio, who met her gaze with gratitude and admiration. Neither spoke immediately, understanding that words were unnecessary in that moment. They had survived together, relying on trust, skill, and courage. The aftermath was quiet but profound. Ahioka tended to the cabin, checked the animals, and ensured that everything was secure. Emilio offered her a warm drink and a small meal, but she shook her head, still processing the events. Her mind was alive with thoughts and reflections, analyzing every moment, every decision, and every movement. She realized that even in this quiet place, danger could arrive unexpectedly, and her skills as a warrior would always be necessary. Emilio, noticing her thoughtful expression, spoke gently. "You are remarkable, Ahioka. You saved us both today." Ahioka met his eyes, her own filled with determination. "It is not just me. We work together, and I learned long ago that protecting life is never a solo effort." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the cabin in warm golden light, Ahioka reflected on the day. She had faced real danger outside the safety of the cabin and had emerged victorious. Yet she knew this was only a lesson in the challenges that life might continue to bring. Strength, she realized, was not just physical but also mental, emotional, and rooted in trust. The next days were a mixture of vigilance and normalcy. Ahioka continued her training, practicing movements and exercises to regain full strength. She also learned from Emilio, discovering techniques to manage the land, understand the animals, and anticipate natural changes in weather. Every day was a blend of lessons, both old and new, and she embraced them fully. Slowly, Ahioka noticed another change within herself. She began to feel a deeper sense of belonging and responsibility toward the ranch, the animals, and Emilio. Her heart, once hardened by the violence of the battlefield, now carried the warmth of connection and shared purpose. She realized that life required more than survival. It required compassion, understanding, and the courage to act in the protection of others. Even as she embraced this new life, Ahioka remained vigilant. She knew the world beyond the cabin was vast and unpredictable. The experience of the intruders had reminded her that peace was fragile and could be threatened at any moment. Yet she also understood that her skills, her intelligence, and her willingness to trust others gave her the power to face whatever challenges might come next. In the quiet evenings, Ahioka and Emilio shared stories, laughter, and reflections. The bond between them grew stronger, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and a recognition of each other's strengths. Ahioka's journey as a warrior had not ended, it had simply evolved. She was learning to combine the skills of survival with the wisdom of life, blending courage with patience, strength with care. One night, as they watched the stars stretch across the sky, Ahioka felt a sense of clarity she had not experienced before. The world was dangerous, unpredictable, and sometimes harsh. Yet it was also full of beauty, learning, and unexpected connections. She realized that being a warrior was not about fighting constantly, but about understanding, adapting, and protecting what mattered most. The events of that day would remain in her memory, a reminder that courage was tested not only in battle, but in the defense of those who could not protect themselves. Ahioka's heart swelled with determination, knowing that she would continue to face life with the same bravery, intelligence, and vigilance that had carried her through every challenge so far. And though challenges would come again, Ahioka felt ready. She had learned that survival, strength, and courage were intertwined with trust, respect, and care. The world outside the cabin remained unpredictable, but she was no longer just a warrior seeking survival. She was a protector, a teacher, and a companion, ready to meet life's challenges with both strength and heart. The days after the attack passed quietly, yet Ahioka knew that life on the ranch would never be exactly the same. Though the intruders had left and the immediate danger had passed, the experience had changed her in subtle but profound ways. She had realized the value of vigilance, the importance of trust, and the quiet strength that comes from protecting others. Now more than ever, she felt the weight and the purpose of her life, not as a lone warrior, but as someone who could create a new path while honoring the lessons of her past. Ahioka had regained nearly all of her strength. She moved through the ranch with confidence, her muscles strong, her reflexes sharp, and her mind alert. Yet she no longer carried the same tense alertness that had dominated her days when she first woke in Emilio's care. She had learned that strength did not always require confrontation. Sometimes it was about patience, understanding, and nurturing life. She began to see the ranch not only as a place to recover but as a home, a space where she could grow, learn, and contribute. Emilio had become more than a caretaker to her. He was a teacher, a guide, and eventually a companion. Through their shared experiences, he had earned her trust completely, and she had begun to rely on him, not as someone who limited her independence, but as someone who complemented her strengths. Together they worked to improve the land, care for the animals, and maintain the cabin. Ahioka learned new skills, from planting and harvesting crops to tending livestock, and she found joy in these simple, honest tasks. One morning, Ahioka walked to the edge of the property where the hills stretched endlessly under the pale light of dawn. She felt the wind on her face, carrying with it the sense of earth, grass, and distant forests. The freedom of the open land reminded her of her village, yet she now understood that freedom could be found in many forms. The ranch was not her homeland, but it was a place where she could protect life, practice her skills, and find purpose. She felt a deep sense of belonging that she had never expected. Emilio approached quietly, carrying a small basket of herbs and vegetables. "You're up early," he said with a smile. Ahioka returned the smile, feeling the warmth of companionship. "I like to watch the sun rise," she said. "It feels peaceful." He nodded, understanding her meaning without question. They shared the silence for a moment, appreciating the beauty of the morning together. Ahioka realized that these simple moments, once taken for granted, now carried deep significance. They were reminders that life could be gentle, nurturing, and fulfilling, even after hardship. As the weeks continued, Ahioka became more involved in the rhythms of ranch life. She helped Emilio plan the seasons, repair fences, and train the animals. Each day was a balance of work, observation, and learning. And while the work was physical, it also required patience and strategy, qualities that reminded her of her training as a warrior. She began to see that her skills were not lost. They were simply being applied in new and meaningful ways. Her bond with Emilio deepened as well. They shared meals, stories, and quiet evenings by the fire. He listened attentively to her tales of her people, her upbringing, and the lessons she had learned in the wilderness. In turn, he shared the history of the land, the ways of the ranch, and his own experiences growing up in a world that demanded resilience. Through these exchanges, Ahioka realized that wisdom was not only found in battle, but also in shared knowledge, trust, and understanding. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the hills. The sky darkened and the wind began to howl, sending rain in sheets across the land. Ahioka and Emilio moved quickly to secure the animals and protect the crops. In the midst of the chaos, Ahioka's warrior instincts kicked in, guiding her actions with precision and calm. She coordinated efforts, anticipating hazards, and ensuring that nothing was lost. When the storm finally passed, the ranch stood intact, a testament to their combined efforts and careful planning. Ahioka stood on the porch, watching the clouds dissipate and the sun break through. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Life, she realized, was a constant test, not always of strength in battle, but of endurance, wisdom, and the ability to act decisively when needed. She had survived, healed, and now thrived in a world that was both peaceful and demanding. Her journey as a warrior had evolved into a journey as a protector of life in all its forms. As time went on, Ahioka began to consider her place in the world. She thought of her village, her people, and the life she had left behind. A part of her longed to return, to see familiar faces and the lands of her childhood. Yet she also recognized that her path had changed. She had been given a second chance, a life filled with opportunity and new responsibilities. She could honor her past while embracing the present. Emilio noticed the thoughtful expression on her face one evening as they walked through the fields. "Are you thinking about your home?" he asked gently. Ahioka nodded. "I am, but I also feel connected here. I feel like I can make a difference," he smiled. "Then perhaps this is where you are meant to be for now. Life has a way of guiding us, even when it is unexpected." Ahioka considered his words. She realized that her strength and courage were not confined to battlefields. They could be used to protect, nurture, and teach. She could combine her warrior spirit with the wisdom she had gained, helping not only the animals and land, but also inspiring those around her with her resilience and skill. Over the months, Ahioka became a vital part of the ranch's daily life. She trained the animals, tended the crops, and even began teaching Emilio some of the tracking and observation skills that had kept her alive in the wilderness. In turn, Emilio shared knowledge of the land, survival techniques, and practical wisdom. Their partnership became a balance of strength and knowledge, respect and trust, independence and collaboration. One morning, Ahioka sat by the stream, reflecting on her journey. She remembered the battlefield where she had nearly died, the cabin where she had awoken, and the moments of fear and uncertainty that had tested her spirit. She thought of Emilio, the intruders, and the many small challenges she had overcome. Each experience had shaped her, teaching her that life was a blend of struggle, growth, and connection. Ahioka smiled softly. She realized that she had found a new purpose, a life where her skills as a warrior could be combined with care, patience, and wisdom. She could protect the ranch, nurture its life, and embrace the beauty of a world she had once only known through battle. Her past and present had merged into a path that felt meaningful and complete. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Ahioka and Emilio sat on the porch together. The world was calm, the air filled with the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. Ahioka felt a deep sense of gratitude for her second chance at life. She had faced death, survived, and discovered not only safety but purpose, trust, and connection. She knew the future would bring challenges, but she also knew she was ready. Emilio turned to her, his eyes reflecting the golden light of sunset. "You've come a long way, Ahioka. I am proud to know you." Ahioka's gaze met his, steady and calm. "I've learned a lot and I will keep learning. Life is a journey and I am ready for it." As night fell, Ahioka closed her eyes, feeling a sense of peace she had never known before. She was still a warrior, strong and vigilant, but she was also a protector, a student of life, and a companion to someone who had helped her heal. Her journey had led her to unexpected places, but it had also brought her clarity, strength, and hope. She knew that life would continue to challenge her, that the world beyond the ranch was vast and unpredictable. Yet she felt ready to face whatever came next, armed with courage, wisdom, and the lessons she had learned. The battlefield of her past had shaped her, but the life she had built now, full of purpose, connection, and resilience, was equally significant. Ahioka's eyes sparkled with determination as she looked at the stars above. The future was hers to embrace, a blend of her past experiences and the new life she had discovered. She had closed her eyes to die once, but she had awakened to live fully, to protect, to grow, and to cherish the moments that made life meaningful. And as she sat quietly beside Emilio, listening to the gentle sounds of the ranch, Ahioka felt a profound truth. Courage was not just in surviving battles, but in embracing life, in trusting others, and in finding purpose beyond fear. She had survived, she had grown, and she was ready for whatever lay ahead. Her journey, though marked by hardship, had led to a life of hope, resilience, and fulfillment. And in that moment, she knew that she was exactly where she was meant to be.